The following presentation regarding the history, valuation, mechanical specifications, and cultural impact of classic American automobiles is strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. The automotive market, particularly concerning vintage and high-performance muscle cars, is subject to extreme volatility, speculative bubbles, and unpredictable historical trends. Any discussions of vehicle values, auction results, restoration costs, or investment potential are based entirely on historical case studies and retrospective market analyses. They do not, under any circumstances, constitute professional financial, investment, legal, or automotive advisory services. Viewers must conduct their own extensive and independent due diligence, utilizing certified appraisers and marque specialists, before making any automotive purchases or entering the classic car investment market. Furthermore, discussions of vehicle performance, horsepower outputs, historical modifications, and racing heritage reflect historical context and past industry standards. This content should not be interpreted as an endorsement or encouragement of unsafe driving practices, illegal street racing, or the circumvention of modern emissions and safety regulations. Always adhere strictly to local traffic laws and consult certified, professional mechanics for any vehicle modifications or restorations. In the early months of 1963, General Motors issued a sweeping draconian corporate edict that was fully intended to kill high performance forever. The decree handed down from the highest executive levels was absolute and uncompromising. No engine larger than 330 cubic inches could legally be placed in an intermediate or mid-sized passenger car platform. The executives sitting in the wood-paneled boardrooms believed they were responsibly protecting the corporate brand from the political fallout of a rapidly growing national highway safety movement. They thought they were mitigating risk and standardizing their production lines. Instead, by attempting to suppress the human desire for speed, they accidentally triggered the most brutal, unhinged, and glorious era of mechanical warfare the industrial world has ever seen. The American muscle car era was not born out of a carefully constructed corporate strategy or consumer-focused groups. It was born out of pure, calculated rebellion and engineering subterfuge. Enter John Z. DeLorean, the renegade chief engineer at Pontiac, who looked at GM's strict engine displacement ban and found a loophole so audacious, so incredibly brazen, that it permanently altered the trajectory of automotive history. DeLorean and his team realized the corporate ban applied strictly to standard production models, not to optional, add-on accessory packages. Working in absolute secrecy, his team quietly took a massive, heavy-breathing 389 cubic inch V8 engine, a power plant originally designed for and strictly reserved for massive, full-size luxury land yachts, and shoehorned it into the lightweight, mid-size Pontiac Tempest platform. They labeled this high-performance package the GTO, a direct and cheeky nod to the Ferrari 250 GTO, and effectively smuggled a purpose-built race car into neighborhood dealer showrooms right under the watchful, conservative noses of GM's top brass. This single, defiant act of corporate insubordination created an immediate and unprecedented national shockwave. Pontiac's conservative internal projections estimated they might possibly sell 5,000 units to a small, niche market of dedicated speed enthusiasts. Instead, they sold over 32,000 units in the very first year alone, overwhelming the production lines. The executives who had desperately tried to ban performance found themselves suddenly drowning in record-breaking profits, and the Great American Horsepower War was officially, irreversibly declared. Ford retaliated with the Mustang and eventually the massive Cobra jet engines. Chrysler unleashed the terrifying, legendary 426 Hemi, an engine so powerful it was essentially a detuned NASCAR power plant sold to the general public. But here is the shocking, sobering reality that the glossy, nostalgic history books frequently gloss over. The true golden age of the American muscle car, a period that completely defined American cultural identity and industrial might, lasted for less than a single tumultuous decade. From the explosive, rule-breaking launch of the GTO to the suffocating onslaught of federal emissions regulations, and the devastating geopolitical reality of the 1973 oil crisis, these rolling monuments to excessive power had a lifespan remarkably shorter than the production run of a standard, modern economy car. The open loop that demands an answer is this: how did an entire dominant industry go from absolute, unrestricted mechanical supremacy, producing terrifying machines capable of dominating a quarter-mile drag strip right off the dealership showroom floor, to suddenly producing completely castrated, fundamentally underpowered shadows of their former selves in just 10 short years? And far more importantly, what were the secret boardroom battles, the frantic engineering miracles, and the catastrophic multi-million-dollar failures that the big three Detroit automakers desperately tried to bury as their performance empires began to rapidly crumble from the inside out. You are about to embark on a definitive, deeply analytical, and unapologetically comprehensive journey through the complete evolution of the American muscle car. This is not just a superficial compilation of horsepower statistics or a collection of nostalgic, sepia-toned photographs. This masterclass is meticulously designed to provide you with a profound, structural understanding of the precise economic, engineering, and cultural mechanics that aggressively drove this brief but monumental era. For the American audience today, truly understanding this specific history is not merely an exercise in automotive nostalgia. It is a critical, highly applicable lens through which to view current and future shifts in the global automotive industry. We are currently standing exactly on the precipice of another massive, fundamental paradigm shift in the automotive world: the highly contested transition to widespread electrification and the controversial, often polarizing dawn of the electric muscle car. By thoroughly dissecting the rapid rise and precipitous fall of the original V8 internal combustion behemoths, you will uncover the exact historical trends that dictate how legacy automakers respond to shifting government regulations, wildly fluctuating consumer demands, and massive technological disruptions. This deep analysis solves a major, persistent problem for modern automotive enthusiasts, prospective classic car collectors, and industry observers alike: the massive gap in understanding how historical vehicle valuations and complex market trends are actually established and sustained over time. We will rigorously strip away the pervasive marketing mythology and examine concrete, data-backed case studies of specific models, breaking down exactly why a 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible can command millions of dollars at a modern auction block today, while fundamentally similar models from the exact same production year remain largely overlooked and undervalued. You will learn how to accurately identify the subtle but crucial engineering milestones, such as the crucial introduction of functional cold air induction systems, the vital shift from unreliable mechanical points to electronic ignition, and the fierce, incredibly expensive aerodynamic wars fought on the high-bank NASCAR superspeedways that systematically transformed everyday, mundane family sedans into incredibly valuable, highly sought-after pieces of rolling history. Furthermore, we will critically analyze the specific, highly targeted marketing psychologies employed by Ford, Chevrolet, Dodge, and Pontiac to aggressively capture the lucrative, emerging youth demographic of the baby boomer generation, a pioneering marketing approach that forever altered how consumer products are sold to the American public. You will see the direct, undeniable correlation between major geopolitical events, specifically the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, and the immediate, drastic, and permanent changes in automotive design, fuel efficiency mandates, and consumer purchasing behavior. This robust, foundational knowledge will directly equip you to far better navigate the incredibly complex modern collector car market, allowing you to separate documented historical facts from highly romanticized, anecdotal folklore. You will truly understand the fundamental engineering DNA that still heavily influences the high-performance vehicles being designed and produced in Detroit today. We will systematically examine the raw production data, the complex supply chain logistics, and the specific, highly guarded mechanical blueprints that definitively define the absolute apex of internal combustion. By the end of this exhaustive deep dive, you will not just look at a classic Chevelle, Mustang, or Charger and simply see a cool vintage automobile. You will see a highly complex artifact of American industrial ambition, a direct product of intense corporate espionage, and a rolling, roaring testament to an era where the only accepted replacement for displacement was undoubtedly more displacement. To understand how this displacement war escalated so rapidly, we have to examine the shifting demographic tectonic plates of the United States in the mid-1960s. Historical trends dictate that whenever a massive influx of young, disposable income enters a consumer market, corporations will fundamentally alter their entire product lines to aggressively capture it. The post-World War II baby boom had created an unprecedented youth demographic hungry for speed and social status. Fast forward to the current year 2026, and a young professional named Christopher might look at purchasing a new performance vehicle as a heavy, highly calculated financial burden involving complex lease structures, soaring interest rates, and charging infrastructure analysis. But back in 1964, the American economy was booming. High-octane gasoline was roughly 30 cents a gallon, and an 18-year-old with a steady summer job could realistically walk into a local dealership and finance a machine capable of breaking every local speed limit in second gear. General Motors had drawn first blood with the Pontiac GTO, But Ford Motor Company was actively preparing a massive counteroffensive that would permanently alter the automotive landscape. Ford executive Lee Iacocca recognized through extensive market research that young buyers did not want the massive, chrome-laden land yachts their parents drove. They wanted European styling combined with brutal, easily accessible American power. This direct consumer insight led to the creation of the Ford Mustang in April of 1964. However, the initial Mustang, while a massive sales success moving over 400,000 units in its first year, suffered from a severe identity crisis. The base model came equipped with a fundamentally anemic 170 cubic inch inline-six engine, producing a meager 101 horsepower. Imagine if a modern automaker launched a flagship performance vehicle featuring the aggressive, wind tunnel-tested aerodynamics of a hypercar, but powered it with the drivetrain of a base model economy hatchback. That was the early Mustang. It had the visual appeal, but it severely lacked the kinetic credibility required to win the streets. To solve this critical performance deficit, Ford initiated a fascinating case study in corporate outsourcing. They turned to legendary Texan racing driver and car builder Carroll Shelby. Ford handed Shelby a strict mandate to transform the fundamentally soft Mustang into a legitimate, track-dominating weapon. Shelby took the lightweight Mustang fastback chassis and initiated a comprehensive engineering overhaul. He ripped out the standard suspension, installing heavy-duty front coil springs, Kone-adjustable shock absorbers, and override traction bars in the rear to eliminate the catastrophic wheel hop that plagued early high-horsepower solid-axle cars. Under the hood, Shelby utilized Ford's K-Code 289 cubic inch V8 engine, but immediately discarded the restrictive factory components. He added a high-rise aluminum intake manifold, a massive 715 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor, and free-flowing tri-Y exhaust headers. The result was the 1965 Shelby GT350, a vehicle producing 306 horsepower in a chassis weighing under 3,000 pounds. Shelby even removed the rear seats entirely, replacing them with a fiberglass shelf to mount a spare tire, which cleverly allowed the GT350 to qualify as a two-seat sports car under the strict homologation rules of the Sports Car Club of America. While Ford and General Motors were busy engaging in a surgical lightweight pony car battle, the engineers over at Chrysler Corporation decided to deploy a completely unhinged nuclear option. They were not interested in European handling or road course finesse. They wanted absolute, undisputed straight-line domination. The result was the rebirth of the legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi V8 engine in 1964. The engineering behind the Hemi was a true masterclass in thermal efficiency and volumetric airflow. Traditional wedge-shaped combustion chambers forced the intake and exhaust valves to sit side by side, heavily restricting the physical size of the valves and creating turbulent, inefficient airflow into the cylinder. Chrysler engineers redesigned the cylinder heads with a hemispherical combustion chamber, placing the massive 2.25-inch intake valves and 1.94-inch exhaust valves directly across from each other. This cross-flow design allowed the engine to inhale and exhale massive volumes of air and fuel with unprecedented efficiency. The 426 Hemi was initially designed exclusively as a pure, dedicated racing engine to dominate the high-banked ovals of NASCAR. It was so immediately and overwhelmingly successful that NASCAR officials completely banned the engine from competition for the 1965 season, citing rules that required racing engines to be widely available to the general public in regular production vehicles. Forced into a corner, Chrysler made a corporate decision that still baffles modern automotive liability lawyers today. They took this violent, high-compression, solid-lifter racing engine, bolted on dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors, and dropped it right into their standard production street cars like the Dodge Charger and Plymouth Belvedere. Imagine if a modern manufacturer in 2026 took their multimillion-dollar, prototype Le Mans racing engine and casually offered it as a factory option in a mid-size family commuter car, available to any teenager with a valid driver license and a down payment. The liability would be absolutely catastrophic by modern standards, yet this was the reality of the 1966 Street Hemi. Chrysler officially rated the Street Hemi at 425 horsepower to appease the nervous insurance companies that were beginning to aggressively monitor the horsepower wars. However, historical case studies and modern dynamometer testing have conclusively proven that this number was a deliberate, calculated corporate lie. In optimal tuning conditions, the 426 Street Hemi was violently producing well over 500 horsepower right off the assembly line. The engineering was remarkably robust, featuring a forged steel crankshaft, forged aluminum pistons, and deeply skirted engine blocks with cross-bolted main bearing caps to prevent the engine from literally tearing itself apart under extreme rotational stress. Buyers were purchasing a detuned race car disguised as a daily driver. As the decade pushed toward 1969 and 1970, the battle lines were completely dissolved. Every manufacturer was pouring millions of dollars into underground racing programs, aerodynamic wind tunnel testing, and massive engine displacement increases. The streets of Detroit, Los Angeles, and Chicago became nocturnal testing grounds for factory engineers who would secretly bring prototype vehicles to local drag strips to test their mettle against the general public. But this unchecked escalation of mechanical warfare was operating on borrowed time. The insurance conglomerates were quietly gathering devastating actuarial data on these massive engines, realizing the power-to-weight ratios of consumer vehicles were matching professional race cars, and they were preparing a financial counterstrike through astronomical premiums that would cripple the industry. And deep within the corporate design studios of General Motors, an entirely new monster was being forged, a vehicle equipped with an engine so massive it would represent the absolute, undeniable peak of the entire muscle car era, right before the sky came crashing down. What exact vehicle finally pushed the government to intervene? And how did clever buyers use secret factory order codes to sneak the most dangerous cars ever built past their insurance agents? The answer lies in the highly guarded, heavily weaponized corporate loophole known as the Central Office Production Order, or the COPO system. By 1968, the massive insurance conglomerates across the United States had finally caught on to the automotive industry's game. Actuaries sitting in high-rise office buildings were meticulously tracking highway data and recognizing that the power-to-weight ratios of these new consumer vehicles were mirroring those of professional track cars. In response, insurance providers began slapping astronomical performance surcharges on any vehicle bearing a known high-performance badge, like the SS, the GTO, or the Cobra Jet. In many historical case studies, a young buyer might successfully finance a $3,000 muscle car, only to discover their annual insurance premium exceeded $1,000, effectively pricing the working class entirely out of the performance market. Concurrently, General Motors was still strictly enforcing its internal corporate mandate that strictly forbade the installation of any engine larger than 400 cubic inches in their midsize and compact platforms, specifically the Chevrolet Chevelle and the Camaro. This meant that while Ford and Chrysler were openly selling 428 and 426 cubic inch street terrors, Chevrolet dealers on the ground were actively losing sales, heavily outgunned on the showroom floor. The solution required an incredible act of corporate espionage from within the company itself. High-performance dealership networks, led by legendary automotive figures like Don Yanko in Pennsylvania and Fred Gibb in Illinois, discovered a clandestine method to entirely bypass the standard regular production option order sheets. The COPO system was originally designed strictly for commercial fleet managers. It was the administrative channel used by municipal taxi companies to order fleets of identical yellow sedans with heavy-duty vinyl seats, or by state highway patrols to order police cruisers equipped with upgraded alternators and reinforced suspension components. It was never intended for civilian performance. However, working quietly with a sympathetic Chevrolet performance manager named Vince Piggins, these rogue dealers realized they could utilize the complex COPO paperwork to essentially force the factory to build cars that technically did not exist in any consumer brochure. Imagine a scenario set in our current year 2026. A consumer named Michael desires the absolute pinnacle of underground performance. Instead of walking into a modern dealership and purchasing the heavily marketed, highly insured flagship sports car from the polished showroom floor, Michael sneaks into the commercial fleet department. He fills out a specialized commercial purchase order typically used for mass transit delivery vans, but through a secret numerical code provided by an industry insider, he legally commands the factory to take a base model, unassuming commuter chassis and secretly install a prototype, highly restricted hypercar powertrain. When Michael registers the vehicle, his insurance provider runs the standard vehicle identification number and sees nothing more than a fleet-spec, low-risk economy car, entirely blind to the multimillion-dollar engineering sitting under the hood. This exact scenario played out in 1969 with the creation of the legendary COPO Camaros. Using order code 9561, dealers could quietly mandate the installation of the massive L72 427 cubic inch iron block V8, an engine conservatively rated at 425 horsepower. But the absolute pinnacle of this secret system was COPO 9560, which birthed the 1969 ZL1 Camaro. The ZL1 engine was an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch masterpiece, originally developed in conjunction with Chaparral cars for the brutal unrestricted Can-Am racing series. It featured dry sump oiling system provisions, open-chamber cylinder heads for maximum volumetric efficiency, and an incredibly aggressive mechanical solid lifter camshaft. Because the entire engine block and cylinder heads were cast from premium aluminum alloys, this massive big block engine weighed roughly the exact same as a standard, small block 327 V8, drastically altering the weight distribution and handling characteristics of the Camaro chassis. The internal corporate rating stated 430 horsepower, a deliberate fabrication designed to pacify the few conservative executives who knew of its existence. In reality, with open exhaust headers and optimal tuning, the ZL1 was violently producing well over 500 true horsepower. The financial barrier to entry, however, was staggering. The ZL1 engine package alone cost over $4,000, effectively doubling the base price of the Camaro and pushing the final retail cost beyond $7,000. Chevrolet only ever produced 69 of these absolute unicorns, making them some of the most highly valued and documented historical artifacts in the modern collector car market today. The sheer audacity of the Copo system, combined with the undeniable external market pressure from Ford and Chrysler, eventually forced the top executives at General Motors to completely surrender. Entering the 1970 model year, GM officially rescinded the 400 cubic inch displacement limit across all their intermediate passenger car platforms. The dam had finally broken, and the immediate result was the absolute, undisputed zenith of the factory muscle car era. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6. By fully lifting the ban, Chevrolet engineers were allowed to take their largest, most potent passenger car engine and aggressively refine it for maximum street performance. The LS6 package featured a colossal 454 cubic inch V8 block, heavily reinforced with 4-bolt main bearing caps to withstand immense rotational forces. Inside, it housed a massive forged steel crankshaft, forged aluminum pistons yielding a staggering 11.25 to 1 compression ratio, and a solid lifter camshaft that aggressively commanded enormous intake and exhaust valves. Fuel delivery was handled by a massive Holley 780 cubic feet per minute 4-barrel carburetor sitting atop an aluminum high-rise intake manifold. The factory boldly rated the LS6 at 450 horsepower and a tectonic 500 pound-feet of torque. This was not a delicate, high-revving European sports car. This was pure, unadulterated American kinetic force. To effectively manage this violent power delivery, buyers could equip the vehicle with the legendary Muncie M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed manual transmission, named specifically for the distinct, aggressive mechanical whine produced by its heavy-duty straight-cut gears. Power was then systematically transferred to a rugged 12-bolt posi-traction rear differential designed entirely to handle the brutal shock loads of drag strip launches. Furthermore, Chevrolet introduced one of the most iconic pieces of active aerodynamics in automotive history, the functional cowl induction hood. This system featured a vacuum-actuated flapper door located near the base of the windshield. When the driver forcefully depressed the throttle, engine vacuum would suddenly drop, causing the door to immediately snap open. This mechanical action allowed the engine to aggressively ingest the high-pressure, dense, cool air that naturally accumulated at the base of the windshield at high speeds, directly feeding the massive Holley carburetor for maximum combustion efficiency. The 1970 Chevelle LS6 represented the absolute peak of internal combustion hubris. It was a vehicle capable of running 13-second quarter-mile times right off the showroom floor, a metric that remains highly respectable even by modern performance engineering standards. But standing at this incredible peak, the entire automotive industry was entirely oblivious to the massive, impending landslide. The LS6 was the ultimate victor of the displacement war, but it was also a massive, highly visible target. It represented the exact mechanical excess that a new wave of politicians, environmentalists, and global economists were preparing to aggressively dismantle. By late 1970, the geopolitical and legislative axes were quietly shifting in Washington, D.C., preparing a devastating counteroffensive that no amount of cubic inches or raw horsepower could possibly outrun. A profound piece of federal legislation was being rapidly drafted that would act as a sudden brutal guillotine to the entire performance industry. What was the devastating law that instantly forced the world's greatest engineers to drastically castrate these massive engines practically overnight? And how did the simple removal of one highly toxic chemical from domestic gasoline permanently change the sound and soul of American roads? The devastating law that instantly forced the world's greatest automotive engineers to fundamentally castrate their massive power plants practically overnight was the Clean Air Act of 1970. Signed into federal law on the very last day of the year, this sweeping bipartisan legislation established the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency and granted it unprecedented, absolute regulatory authority over mobile sources of pollution. The government issued a strict, non-negotiable mandate. Domestic automakers had to drastically reduce hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide emissions by 90% within a brutally short timeline of just 5 years. To achieve this monumental task, the agency took immediate, aggressive aim at the lifeblood of the high-compression muscle car engine, a highly toxic, incredibly effective chemical fuel additive known as tetraethyl lead. To fully understand the catastrophic mechanical consequences of this chemical removal, we must examine the fundamental engineering physics of the internal combustion engine. Shutterstock. Since the 1920s, petroleum refineries had been blending tetraethyl lead into domestic gasoline. This chemical acted as an artificial chemical cushion, drastically raising the octane rating of the fuel and allowing it to resist premature detonation under extreme pressure. In a high-performance engine like the 1970 Chevelle LS6 or the Chrysler 426 Hemi, the piston violently compresses the air and fuel mixture into a very tight space before the spark plug ignites it. This is known as the compression ratio. If the fuel detonates from ambient heat and pressure before the spark plug fires, a destructive condition known as engine knock or pre-ignition occurs, which can literally shatter forged pistons and destroy an engine block in a matter of seconds. Tetraethyl lead prevented this fatal detonation, allowing engineers to push compression ratios to a staggering 11.25 to 1 or even 12.0 to 1 straight from the factory. Furthermore, the lead acted as a vital microscopic lubricant, coating the exhaust valve seats and preventing them from welding to the cylinder heads under the intense, searing heat of exhaust gases. When the federal government mandated the phase-out of leaded gasoline to prepare for the upcoming introduction of sensitive emissions control devices, General Motors issued a sweeping corporate edict in late 1970. Management decreed that every single engine produced for the 1971 model year, from economy sedans to flagship performance vehicles, must be completely capable of running on widely available 91-octane regular unleaded fuel. The engineering solution to this sudden mandate was incredibly primitive and mechanically devastating. The only way to prevent their high-performance engines from destroying themselves on low-octane, unleaded fuel was to drastically lower the compression ratios. Engineers essentially hollowed out the pistons or installed thicker head gaskets, expanding the volume of the combustion chamber. Overnight, the standard compression ratio plummeted from a hyper-aggressive 11.25 to 1 down to a fundamentally asthmatic 8.5 to 1. This drastically reduced the thermal efficiency and explosive force of the combustion cycle. The massive, fire-breathing big block engines physically lost their kinetic punch, transforming from terrifying street weapons into sluggish, inefficient cast iron anchors. Imagine a scenario set in our current year 2026. An automotive data analyst named Marcus is conducting a rigorous historical case study on classic car auction valuations to predict future market trends. Marcus isolates the Chevrolet Corvette and notices a massive, immediate valuation cliff separating the 1970 models from the 1972 models, despite both vehicles looking virtually identical from the exterior. The aggressive, chaotic, loping idol that had defined the soundtrack of the American street racing scene was being systematically silenced, replaced by the breathless, asthmatic hum of an industry being strangled by red tape. The once mighty muscle car was being heavily modified into a heavy, unresponsive, fundamentally compromised machine that possessed neither the fuel efficiency of a compact car nor the raw kinetic thrill of its immediate predecessors. The federal regulators had effectively choked the engines, and the massive insurance conglomerates had priced the remaining performance options entirely out of reach for the average working-class consumer. But the final fatal blow that would ultimately seal the coffin of the golden era did not originate from the political halls of Washington or the financial districts of Wall Street. It came from across the globe in a sudden catastrophic geopolitical shockwave that would brutally force American citizens to wait in chaotic lines for hours just to purchase a single strictly rationed gallon of fuel. What was the specific, devastating international crisis that completely paralyzed the entire American highway system in the fall of 1973? And how did a sudden, terrifying shortage of crude oil permanently execute the few remaining survivors of the Great Displacement War? The specific, devastating international crisis that completely paralyzed the entire American highway system was the 1973 OPEC oil embargo. In October of that year, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries initiated a highly targeted, intensely coordinated embargo against nations supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War, heavily focusing their economic wrath on the United States. This was not a slow, predictable market correction. It was a sudden, violent severing of the global energy supply chain that instantly sent shockwaves through the American economy. Almost overnight, the global price of a single barrel of crude oil quadrupled, skyrocketing from roughly $3 to nearly $12. The immediate, terrifying localized effect on the American consumer was absolute pandemonium. The era of cheap, heavily abundant high-octane fuel, the very economic foundation upon which the entire American muscle car empire was rapidly built, vanished in a matter of days. Imagine a highly disruptive scenario set in our current year 2026. An American consumer named Sarah relies heavily on a cutting-edge, high-performance electric vehicle for her daily commute and lifestyle. Suddenly, a massive, unprecedented geopolitical crisis completely severs the global supply chain of rare earth metals and critically destabilizes the domestic electrical grid, forcing the federal government to strictly ration residential and commercial charging capabilities to just 2 hours a week. Panic ensues, massive gridlock grips major metropolitan areas, and Sarah's incredibly fast, heavy, and expensive vehicle instantly becomes an unusable, rapidly depreciating liability. This modern hypothetical perfectly mirrors the brutal, boots-on-the-ground reality of late 1973. American drivers were suddenly subjected to strict, heavily enforced government fuel rationing programs based on odd and even license plate numbers. Local gas stations proudly flew highly visible red, yellow, and green flags to visually signal their rapidly dwindling fuel inventory to desperate motorists. Tempers flared, and physical altercations frequently broke out in massive lines of idling cars that stretched for literal miles down suburban streets. In this chaotic, highly stressed environment, owning a massive 4,000-pound Chevrolet Chevelle, or a sprawling Dodge Charger equipped with a 440 cubic inch V8 that generously achieved 8 miles to the gallon was no longer a proud symbol of youthful rebellion or absolute street supremacy. It became a severe, immediate, and incredibly punishing financial burden. The American public violently shifted their automotive purchasing habits practically overnight, completely abandoning the high-performance Detroit showrooms and desperately flocking to imported, hyper-efficient four-cylinder compact cars from Japanese manufacturers like Honda and Toyota. Historical trends in consumer behavior absolutely dictate that when daily economic stability and basic commuting survival are directly threatened, intense brand loyalty and massive horsepower metrics are instantly discarded in favor of pure utilitarian efficiency. The massive Detroit automakers were caught completely off guard. Their multi-million-dollar engineering pipelines entirely choked with heavy, highly inefficient, large displacement vehicles that were suddenly obsolete. The most dramatic, highly documented case study of this desperate corporate pivot is the 1974 Ford Mustang II. Lee Iacocca, the legendary executive who birthed the original sprawling Mustang just a decade earlier, recognized the massive impending shift and aggressively forced his internal engineering teams to drastically downsize the flagship vehicle. They utilized the existing subcompact Ford Pinto platform as the foundational architecture to rapidly save development costs. When the 1974 Mustang II hit the showroom floors, it was a fundamental shadow of its former glory. For the very first time in the vehicle's long history, a V8 engine was not even offered as an option on the order sheet. The base engine was a fundamentally anemic 2.3-liter four-cylinder, producing a microscopic 88 horsepower. The top-tier performance option was a heavily restricted 2.8-liter V6 laboring, aggressively to generate just 105 horsepower. To put this brutal castration in stark perspective, this completely neutered Mustang required over 13 grueling seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour from a dead stop. Yet, despite the complete and total abandonment of genuine mechanical performance, the corporate market timing was terrifyingly perfect. Driven purely by immense fuel panic and crippling economic anxiety, American consumers purchased nearly 400,000 units of the Mustang II in its first year of production. The undeniable message sent to Detroit executives was loud, clear, and absolutely fatal to the muscle car era. Raw performance was officially dead, and maximum fuel economy was the sole path to long-term corporate survival. There was, however, one final, incredibly defiant gasp of the true American muscle car spirit before the total corporate blackout, heavily engineered by a rogue group of traditionalists at Pontiac. While the rest of the industry was frantically detuning and actively downsizing their power plants, Pontiac released the legendary Super Duty 455 engine in 1973 and 1974 specifically for the Firebird Trans Am. This was a true hand-assembled race engine operating undercover as a standard street block. It featured heavy-duty 4-bolt main bearings, specifically forged connecting rods, and high-flow cylinder heads directly derived from their officially discontinued corporate racing programs. To successfully sneak this massive, high-polluting engine past the increasingly hostile Environmental Protection Agency regulators, Pontiac engineers employed a highly controversial, heavily scrutinized tactic. They installed a sophisticated exhaust gas recirculation valve system that incorporated a specific timer relay, allowing the engine to perfectly pass the government's standard stationary smog tests, while seamlessly delivering massive, unrestricted power when out on the open street. But the federal government eventually discovered the clever engineering ruse, forced a massive corporate recall, and permanently shut down the entire Super Duty program. By the end of 1974, the last of the high-compression big-block Titans were systematically and permanently executed. The absolute final nail in the heavy iron coffin was driven deep by the federal government in 1975, with the strict implementation of corporate average fuel economy legislation. This sweeping, complex mandate mathematically forced the major American automakers to meet a mandatory, incredibly strict fleet-wide fuel efficiency average. If a manufacturer wanted to sell a thirsty high-horsepower V8 to a performance enthusiast, they were mathematically required to sell thousands of tiny, underpowered, highly fuel-efficient compacts to perfectly balance the overall corporate ledger, or face absolutely crippling financial penalties from the federal government. This rigid regulatory framework permanently altered the fundamental economics of automotive manufacturing, making the mass production of dedicated, large displacement muscle cars mathematically impossible for decades to come. As 1975 fully dawned, the American highway entered what automotive historians solemnly refer to as the malaise era. The federal government mandated the widespread installation of incredibly restrictive, exhaust-choking catalytic converters on all new passenger cars to aggressively combat the national smog crisis. These massive, extreme heat-generating components essentially acted like a dense blockage shoved directly into the tailpipe of the engine, absolutely devastating the critical flow of exhaust gases and further killing horsepower output across the entire industry board. The legendary performance badges that once commanded absolute fear and respect on the local drag strips were suddenly reduced to pure, highly cynical marketing gimmicks. Desperate automakers began rapidly trying to sell the visual illusion of speed, totally substituting actual engine displacement and mechanical engineering with garish tape stripes, massive hood decals, and aggressive polyurethane body kits firmly attached to fundamentally powerless, heavy chassis. But deep in the heart of this incredibly bleak, suffocating regulatory darkness, one specific highly customized vehicle painted completely in stark black, prominently adorned with a massive golden bird on its hood, heavily utilized the massive cultural reach of Hollywood cinema to single-handedly keep the American V8 dream functioning on life support. What was this iconic, culturally defining machine, and how did a simple action movie about illegal interstate bootlegging create a massive, unprecedented sales explosion that completely baffled the very automotive executives who had prematurely declared the muscle car permanently dead? The iconic, culturally defining machine that single-handedly kept the American high-performance dream functioning on life support was the 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Special Edition, specifically identified by its internal General Motors production code Y82. To truly comprehend the absolute mechanical and cultural miracle of this specific vehicle, we must rigorously analyze the suffocating automotive landscape of the late 1970s. The federal government had instituted a deeply unpopular, strictly enforced national speed limit of exactly 55 miles per hour to aggressively conserve domestic fuel reserves following the embargo. Highway patrol officers were heavily utilizing newly developed radar gun technology to rigorously enforce this incredibly slow mandate, handing out massive financial citations to a frustrated American public. The golden era of unrestricted street racing and terrifying quarter-mile times was thoroughly documented history. The top-tier engine available in the 1977 Trans Am was the W72 400 cubic inch V8. In stark contrast to the massive 500 horsepower Titans of the previous decade, this heavily restricted, smog-choked engine produced a highly documented, rather depressing 200 horsepower. If we strictly analyze the raw mechanical data, the 1977 Trans Am was not a genuine muscle car in the traditional brute force sense. It was heavily burdened by heavy steel crash bumpers, a massive, power-robbing catalytic converter, and incredibly restrictive cylinder heads designed solely to appease the Environmental Protection Agency. However, Pontiac engineers and designers executed a flawless case study in psychological automotive marketing. They fundamentally understood that since they could no longer legally sell raw, undisputed straight-line speed, they had to aggressively sell the visual illusion of speed and the powerful, intoxicating attitude of anti-establishment rebellion. They painted the entire vehicle in a deep, sinister starlight black, accented it with intricate German-style gold pinstriping, bolted on highly stylized gold snowflake cast aluminum wheels, and completely dominated the hood with a massive, highly aggressive golden Firebird decal, affectionately known internally as the Screaming Chicken. Furthermore, they installed a highly desirable Hearst T-top roof system with removable tinted glass panels, instantly transforming the heavy coupe into a highly stylized open-air cruiser. But the true unprecedented sales explosion was entirely triggered by a massive Hollywood theatrical release in the summer of 1977 titled Smokey and the Bandit. The film centered heavily around a highly illegal, interstate bootlegging operation, featuring actors Burt Reynolds and Sally Field constantly outrunning heavily armed, highly frustrated law enforcement officers across the American South. The absolute star of the film was not the actors, but the black and gold 1977 Trans Am. The vehicle was aggressively utilized on screen to perform massive burnouts, high-speed evasive maneuvers, and massive, physically impossible jumps over broken bridges. The American public, thoroughly exhausted by strict government regulations, massive fuel lines, and the overall depressing nature of the malaise era, instantly connected with the vehicle. The Trans Am perfectly represented absolute outlaw freedom. It was a massive rolling middle finger to the suffocating federal mandates and the heavily policed 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. Imagine a scenario set in our current year 2026. An automotive consumer named Jessica is heavily researching historical trends in vehicle sales forecasting. She discovers that in the modern era, heavily reliant on highly targeted, multi-million-dollar social media algorithms and massive digital influencer campaigns, it is incredibly difficult for a single piece of media to permanently alter an entire corporate production line. Yet, in 1977, a single relatively low-budget action comedy completely shattered General Motors sales projections without a single algorithm or targeted internet advertisement. Prior to the release of the film in 1976, Pontiac sold a highly respectable 46,000 Trans Am units. Following the explosive cultural impact of the film, sales absolutely skyrocketed. By 1978, eager consumers purchased over 93,000 units. By 1979, the final year of the large displacement 400 cubic inch engine, production crested at a staggering 117,000 units. The very same General Motors executives who had actively debated completely terminating the Firebird platform just 3 years prior, due to massive regulatory pressure, were now frantically forcing their assembly plants to run double shifts just to keep up with the unprecedented, entirely emotion-driven consumer demand. To support this highly aggressive visual marketing strategy, Pontiac engineers made a critical, fundamental pivot in their chassis development, a pivot that permanently altered the fundamental DNA of the American performance vehicle. Since massive horsepower was heavily restricted by federal law, engineers heavily refocused their limited research and development budgets entirely on lateral grip and high-speed cornering stability. They introduced the legendary WS6 Special Performance Package in 1978. This highly engineered suspension upgrade featured massively widened 8-inch cast aluminum wheels, specialized Goodyear radial tires boasting stiffened sidewalls, heavy-duty shock absorbers, and significantly thicker front and rear sway bars. They also introduced a tighter, constant ratio steering box directly sourced from their corporate racing divisions. The exact mechanical result was a heavy, fundamentally underpowered vehicle that could surprisingly outhandle and outcorner the flagship Chevrolet Corvette of the exact same era on a technical road course. The American muscle car was no longer strictly defined by quarter-mile drag strip times. It was heavily evolving into a highly capable corner-carving grand tourer. However, this brilliant, highly profitable corporate illusion could only sustain the industry for a brief period. As the calendar aggressively pushed into the early 1980s, the suffocating grip of federal emissions standards tightened even further. The legendary large displacement V8 engines were completely suffocating, fundamentally incapable of meeting the stringent new smog mandates without suffering massive, catastrophic losses in reliability and drivability. By 1981, Pontiac was strictly forced to abandon their traditional V8 power plants entirely, resorting to a highly experimental, drastically undersized 301 cubic inch turbocharged V8. This specific engine was an absolute mechanical disaster, heavily plagued by extreme heat management issues, heavily delayed turbo lag, and primitive, highly unreliable early computer control systems. The iconic Trans Am, the great survivor of the malaise era, had finally lost its mechanical soul, reduced to a heavy, incredibly slow caricature of its former glory. The entire American performance industry was completely paralyzed, trapped in a terrifying engineering freefall. The traditional V8 engine was widely and publicly declared a prehistoric relic by major automotive journalists, destined for absolute extinction. Major Detroit automakers were desperately, frantically searching for any possible technological miracle to resurrect their dying performance heritage. Suddenly, an unassuming, highly conservative division of General Motors, historically famous for building quiet, heavily insulated luxury vehicles for retired executives, shocked the entire global automotive establishment. They made the terrifying, highly controversial corporate decision to completely abandon the massive V8 formula entirely. Instead, they bolted a crude, highly experimental turbocharger to a humble, fundamentally basic V6 engine, painted the entire vehicle in a sinister monochromatic black, and unleashed it upon the public. What was this terrifying high-tech machine that actively humiliated the absolute greatest 12-cylinder Italian supercars of the 1980s on the drag strip? And how did the sudden explosive introduction of primitive microchips and electronic fuel injection permanently resurrect the American muscle car from the absolute graveyard of the malaise era? The terrifying high-tech machine that actively humiliated the absolute greatest 12-cylinder Italian supercars of the 1980s on the drag strip was the Buick Grand National, and its ultimate, highly engineered evolution, the legendary 1987 GNX. To understand the sheer absurdity and the massive historical impact of this specific vehicle, we must closely examine the corporate identity of the Buick Motor Division during this era. Historically, Buick was fundamentally positioned as a conservative, premium luxury brand. Their primary demographic consisted of middle-aged executives, doctors, and retirees who highly valued plush velour interiors, soft suspension dynamics, and completely silent highway cruising. Buick was the absolute last brand anyone in the automotive industry expected to wage a violent, highly successful war against the global performance establishment. Yet, hidden deep within their engineering department was a rogue group of forward-thinking visionaries who recognized that massive displacement V8 engines were no longer mathematically viable under strict federal emissions mandates. Instead of mourning the death of the traditional muscle car, they fully embraced a radical new technological frontier: forced induction combined with primitive, yet revolutionary, microchip processing. The foundational architecture of this massive disruption was the Buick 3.8-liter, 231 cubic inch V6 engine. By traditional American performance standards, a six-cylinder engine was historically considered a severe compromise, a fundamentally anemic option reserved strictly for budget-conscious fleet vehicles. However, Buick engineers systematically transformed this basic cast-iron block into a highly sophisticated technological marvel. The critical turning point occurred with the widespread implementation of the microprocessor, specifically the introduction of the engine control module. Prior to this exact moment in history, American performance relied entirely on crude, imprecise mechanical carburetors and vacuum-operated distributors. These mechanical systems were fundamentally incapable of perfectly managing the complex, incredibly volatile air and fuel mixtures required for high-performance forced induction on low-octane, unleaded pump gasoline. Imagine a highly analytical scenario set in our current year 2026. An automotive software engineer named David is conducting a rigorous historical case study on early engine telemetry. David utilizes incredibly complex, multi-core processors to instantaneously adjust the ignition timing and fuel delivery of a modern hypercar hundreds of times per second. When David analyzes the 1980s Buick engine control module, he discovers a remarkably primitive silicon chip, possessing less raw computing power than a modern digital wristwatch. Yet, for its specific era, this rudimentary computer was an absolute engineering miracle. It actively monitored an array of sophisticated electronic sensors, including a mass airflow sensor located in the intake tract, an oxygen sensor integrated directly into the exhaust stream, and a highly critical acoustic knock sensor physically bolted to the engine block. This specific electronic network allowed Buick engineers to successfully bolt a massive Garrett turbocharger directly to the V6 engine. As the turbocharger violently force dense, highly compressed air into the cylinders, the engine control module constantly calculated the exact mathematical ratio of necessary fuel, utilizing newly developed sequential electronic fuel injection to fire each individual injector precisely as the intake valve opened. If the acoustic knock sensor detected even the slightest microscopic vibration of engine detonation caused by the low-quality fuel, the computer would instantaneously retard the ignition timing in milliseconds, physically saving the engine from catastrophically destroying itself under extreme boost pressure. This brilliant synergy of mechanical forced induction and electronic oversight completely solved the precise engineering failure that had abruptly killed the high-compression V8 engines in the early 1970s. The absolute pinnacle of this specific technological movement arrived in 1987 with the highly limited production of the Buick GNX, short for Grand National Experimental. General Motors executives knew the rear-wheel drive G-body platform was officially scheduled for total termination at the end of the year, so they authorized one final unrestricted engineering project to permanently cement the vehicle in automotive history. Buick officially partnered with American Sunroof Company and McLaren Performance Technologies to heavily modify exactly 547 fully assembled Grand Nationals. The modifications were intensely surgical and highly effective. McLaren engineers replaced the standard turbocharger with a highly advanced, lightweight ceramic impeller wheel that drastically reduced rotational mass, virtually eliminating the heavily frustrating acceleration delay, known as turbo lag. They installed a massive, high-efficiency air-to-air intercooler directly behind the front grille to drastically drop the temperature of the compressed intake charge, fundamentally increasing the oxygen density and volumetric efficiency of the combustion cycle. To handle the violent, sudden surge of turbocharged torque, the entire rear suspension architecture was rigorously re-engineered. McLaren installed a highly specialized, heavy-duty torque arm that physically connected the rear axle housing directly to the transmission crossmember, functioning in tandem with the lateral panhard bar. When the driver aggressively applied the throttle, this specific geometric arrangement violently forced the rear tires directly downward into the pavement, completely eliminating the catastrophic wheel hop that traditionally plagued high-horsepower live-axle vehicles. The resulting performance metrics absolutely shattered the established global hierarchy. Buick officially rated the GNX at a highly conservative 276 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque to appease internal General Motors management and prevent the vehicle from officially outshining the flagship Chevrolet Corvette on paper. However, highly documented historical case studies and independent dynamometer testing later proved the engine was violently producing well over 300 horsepower and an absolutely tectonic 420 pound-feet of torque straight from the factory. When independent automotive journalists rigorously tested the GNX on the drag strip, the data was completely undeniable and incredibly embarrassing for European manufacturers. The heavy, fundamentally square, completely black Buick sedan rocketed from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 4.6 seconds and completely obliterated the quarter mile in 13.2 seconds. To accurately place these highly aggressive numbers into their proper historical context, the GNX was mathematically faster in a straight line than the V12-powered Ferrari Testarossa, significantly faster than the Lamborghini Countach, and absolutely humiliated the twin-turbocharged Porsche 930 of the exact same production year. A fundamentally domestic, six-cylinder family sedan utilizing primitive microchips had successfully executed a total takeover of the high-performance global market, permanently proving that immense V8 displacement was no longer the sole, undisputed king of the American highway. The immense, unprecedented success of electronic fuel injection and computerized engine management completely revitalized the massive Detroit engineering departments. The technological dam had burst, and the major automakers rapidly realized they could successfully apply these exact same electronic principles to their traditional, highly beloved V8 architectures. As the decade aggressively pushed toward the late 1980s, an incredibly fierce, highly competitive new battleground was rapidly forming. The technological groundwork laid by the turbocharged V6 was directly preparing to ignite a massive, highly anticipated resurgence of the traditional American pony car war, bringing cheap, easily modified fuel-injected V8 power directly back to the sprawling high school parking lots and local drag strips across the United States. But this massive corporate resurgence was very nearly derailed by an incredibly catastrophic internal corporate decision at Ford Motor Company that almost resulted in the complete and total termination of their most iconic, culturally significant vehicle. What was the massive engineering blunder that almost transformed the legendary rear-wheel drive Mustang into a fundamentally compromised, front-wheel drive Japanese economy car? And how did a massive, unprecedented letter-writing campaign from highly enraged American consumers force executives to completely reverse their corporate strategy at the final possible hour? The massive engineering blunder that almost transformed the legendary rear-wheel drive Mustang into a fundamentally compromised, front-wheel drive Japanese economy car originated deep within the risk-averse boardrooms of Ford Motor Company in the early 1980s. Executives were rigorously analyzing historical trends in global fuel prices, shifting consumer demographics, and the rapidly growing market dominance of highly efficient imported vehicles. They incorrectly, yet confidently, assumed the traditional V8 engine was completely dead, permanently killed by government regulations and changing public tastes. To aggressively save hundreds of millions of dollars in future development costs, Ford entered into a highly strategic corporate partnership with Mazda. The objective was to build a sleek, aerodynamically efficient, front-wheel drive sports coupe, utilizing the established Mazda MX-6 chassis architecture. This completely new vehicle, internally coded by engineers as the SN16 project, was fully slated to hit dealership showroom floors as the official 1989 Ford Mustang, permanently erasing decades of rear-wheel drive performance heritage in a single incredibly short-sighted corporate stroke. Imagine a highly disruptive scenario set in our current year 2026. A dedicated automotive consumer named Kevin has spent his entire adult life admiring and purchasing a specific, flagship rear-wheel drive American performance vehicle. One morning, the manufacturer suddenly issues a press release announcing that the next generation of this legendary, culturally significant car will not only permanently lose its iconic V8 engine, but will also be completely transitioned to a front-wheel drive economy chassis engineered entirely by a rival overseas corporation. This massive shift would heavily dilute the fundamental DNA of the brand, completely stripping away the specific mechanical characteristics that made the vehicle desirable in the first place. Kevin would be absolutely devastated, heavily betrayed by the corporate entity he had financially supported for years. This modern hypothetical perfectly mirrors the profound, intense betrayal American automotive consumers felt in the spring of 1987, when the highly prominent automotive publication AutoWeek officially leaked these secret corporate plans on their front cover, detailing the exact front-wheel drive specifications of the upcoming Mustang. The public backlash was incredibly violent and immediate. Ford headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, was suddenly inundated with tens of thousands of furious, highly critical letters from loyal Mustang enthusiasts, National Car Club presidents, and local drag racers. These highly vocal consumers aggressively demanded the absolute continuation of the traditional rear-wheel drive, V8-powered Fox body platform. The sheer, unprecedented volume of physical mail completely overwhelmed the corporate mailrooms and fundamentally terrified the marketing department. It was a massive, highly successful grassroots movement that directly forced top Ford executives to rapidly execute a massive multi-million-dollar corporate pivot at the final possible hour. They made the last-minute, incredibly expensive decision to release the Mazda-based vehicle under a completely different nameplate, the Ford Probe, while simultaneously investing heavily to save, modernize, and completely overhaul the aging Fox body Mustang platform for the coming decade. To successfully ensure the long-term survival of the true, traditional Mustang, Ford engineers deployed a brilliant, highly effective mechanical upgrade for the 1987 model year. They took the traditional 302 cubic inch V8 engine, universally known on the street as the 5.0-liter, and equipped it with a highly advanced, vastly superior sequential electronic fuel injection system. This complex system utilized 8 individual fuel injectors, one for each specific cylinder, fired precisely by a state-of-the-art microchip processing unit known as the Electronic Engine Control Module, or the EC4. Unlike the crude, heavily restricted, poorly tuned carbureted engines of the Malaise era, this newly developed electronically managed power plant delivered incredibly crisp throttle response, flawless cold weather starting reliability, and perfectly optimized air-to-fuel ratios across the entire power band. Furthermore, Ford engineers systematically installed highly efficient forged aluminum pistons, a significantly more aggressive roller camshaft that heavily reduced internal valve train friction, and newly designed E7T cast iron cylinder heads specifically engineered for optimal volumetric airflow. Finally, they bolted on highly efficient, free-flowing tubular stainless steel exhaust headers right from the factory assembly line. The resulting mechanical configuration was a massive, undeniable triumph. The 1987 Mustang GT produced a highly reliable, heavily documented 225 horsepower and an astonishing 300 pound-feet of torque. These numbers might seem fundamentally modest by modern standards, but in a lightweight chassis weighing barely over 3,000 pounds, the power-to-weight ratio was absolutely lethal. This specific technological breakthrough completely resurrected the American pony car war from the absolute ashes. Across town, Chevrolet engineers were aggressively fighting back with the highly stylized Camaro IROC-Z, a vehicle specifically named after the International Race of Champions series. To directly combat the Mustang, Chevrolet equipped the Camaro with their own highly advanced tuned port injection 5.7-liter V8. This massive engine utilized incredibly long, highly engineered aluminum intake runners designed specifically to ram dense air into the cylinders at lower engine speeds, producing massive tire-destroying low-end torque directly off the starting line. The streets of the United States were once again filled with the deep, visceral, highly intoxicating rumble of domestic V8 engines fighting for absolute supremacy. The incredible affordability and mass availability of the Fox body Mustang and the third-generation Camaro made them the undisputed kings of the grassroots street racing scene. Case studies of early drag racing events from this era show that a young automotive consumer could easily purchase a base model Mustang LX, heavily strip away all unnecessary interior weight, completely modify the suspension geometry, and possess a highly lethal, mathematically superior drag strip weapon capable of completely humiliating European sports cars costing 3 times as much. Potential outcomes for these backyard mechanics included creating cars that regularly ran 10-second quarter-mile times, birthing a massive, highly lucrative aftermarket parts industry. Companies rapidly designed high-flow intake manifolds, aggressive exhaust systems, and specialized engine tuning chips to safely extract even more hidden horsepower from these newly computerized platforms. The traditional American muscle car had successfully survived the brutal gas crises, perfectly adapted to the incredibly strict federal emissions mandates, and successfully integrated advanced computer technology to become faster and more reliable than ever before. But this renewed era of affordable high-tech V8 performance was rapidly heading toward a massive collision with a completely different kind of corporate warfare. As the calendar aggressively pushed toward the 1990s, an entirely new class of specialized, highly funded engineering teams known as factory tuning divisions began to secretly weaponize these mass-produced vehicles to an unprecedented degree. What was the absolute zenith of this highly specialized era that featured an incredibly rare, hand-built Chevrolet Corvette possessing a highly advanced all-aluminum engine designed entirely by a legendary British marine engineering firm? And why did General Motors executives deliberately lie to the public about its true top speed to protect their own fragile corporate egos? The incredibly rare, hand-built Chevrolet Corvette possessing a highly advanced all-aluminum engine designed entirely by a legendary British marine engineering firm was the 1990 Corvette ZR1. Universally known within General Motors testing facilities as the King of the Hill. To fully comprehend the absolute mechanical absurdity of this specific vehicle, we must rigorously analyze the corporate landscape of General Motors in the late 1980s. Executives were highly frustrated that the standard flagship Corvette, equipped with the traditional L98 pushrod V8 engine, was fundamentally incapable of matching the high-speed aerodynamic performance of the Ferrari Testarossa and the Porsche 928. The domestic engineering teams had successfully maximized the low-end torque of the pushrod architecture, but the internal engine breathing heavily restricted the high RPM capabilities required to dominate the European supercars on long, unrestricted straightaways. Recognizing a massive gap in their internal engineering talent, General Motors executives made a highly controversial, heavily guarded decision to completely outsource the heart of their most iconic vehicle. They utilized their recent corporate acquisition of Group Lotus, the legendary British engineering firm historically famous for dominating Formula One racing, and issued a strict mandate to design the most technologically advanced, naturally aspirated V8 engine the world had ever seen. The resulting mechanical masterpiece was the LT5. This was a massive sweeping departure from traditional American automotive engineering. Lotus completely discarded the primitive pushrod configuration and designed a highly complex, 32-valve engine featuring dual overhead camshafts. The entire engine block and cylinder heads were precision cast from aerospace-grade aluminum. However, the true engineering miracle was how Lotus integrated a brilliant, highly sophisticated dual-stage intake system to perfectly balance low-speed drivability with absolute top-end speed. Each cylinder utilized 2 specific intake valves and 2 distinct fuel injectors. At low speeds, the engine control module heavily restricted airflow strictly to the primary intake valve, creating high-velocity turbulence that produced massive low-end torque for daily driving. But the moment the driver forcefully depressed the throttle pedal past half capacity and the engine crossed 3,000 revolutions per minute, the computer systematically opened the secondary throttle plates and activated the secondary fuel injectors. The engine would instantly transform, aggressively inhaling massive volumes of oxygen and screaming toward a violently high 7,000 revolution per minute redline. General Motors immediately encountered a massive, multi-million-dollar manufacturing crisis. The traditional Chevrolet engine assembly plants were fundamentally unequipped to handle the microscopic precision and complex hand assembly required by the intricate Lotus design. In a fascinating case study of industrial outsourcing, General Motors systematically contracted Mercury Marine, a highly specialized engineering firm located in Stillwater, Oklahoma, historically famous for building incredibly durable, high-horsepower outboard boat motors. Mercury Marine physically cast, meticulously assembled, and rigorously tested every single LT5 engine before shipping them completely across the country to the Corvette assembly plant in Kentucky. The performance results were absolutely staggering. During highly classified track testing, the ZR1 was effortlessly sustaining speeds well over 180 miles per hour, completely obliterating the 24-hour endurance speed record previously held by a highly modified prototype. Yet, when the vehicle was officially released to the public, General Motors executives deliberately lied in their corporate press releases and heavily restricted the marketing materials, vastly understating the true top speed of the vehicle. This was a highly calculated, completely ego-driven corporate strategy. Simultaneously, Ford Motor Company realized they urgently needed a dedicated, highly specialized internal division to actively compete in this rapidly escalating horsepower war. In 1993, Ford officially launched the Special Vehicle Team, universally known as SVT. The specific mission of SVT was to take standard, mass-produced assembly line vehicles and aggressively re-engineer them for maximum track performance without completely destroying their daily drivability. Historical trends show that specialized factory tuning heavily increases long-term vehicle valuation, and the 1993 SVT Mustang Cobra perfectly exemplifies this reality. SVT engineers took the aging Fox body platform and installed highly advanced GT40 cast-iron cylinder heads, a specialized two-piece aluminum intake manifold directly heavily inspired by their corporate racing programs, and massive highly upgraded disc brakes. To perfectly optimize the fuel delivery, they installed larger 24-pound-per-hour fuel injectors and a highly calibrated mass airflow sensor. General Motors responded by heavily partnering with Street Legal Performance, an independent engineering firm, to aggressively modify the newly redesigned fourth-generation Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird. These highly specialized limited production vehicles, known as the Camaro SS and the Firebird Firehawk, featured aggressive ram air induction hoods that directly channeled high-pressure air directly into the intake tract, free-flowing stainless steel exhaust systems, and highly specialized suspension geometries that completely transformed the aerodynamic, heavily sloped vehicles into highly lethal track weapons capable of producing well over 300 horsepower. As the 1990s heavily progressed, the physical design language of the American muscle car became incredibly smooth, highly aerodynamic, and heavily reliant on wind tunnel testing to maximize high-speed fuel efficiency. The sharp, aggressive angles of the past were completely replaced by sleek, jelly bean-inspired silhouettes. While the fundamental mechanical performance was mathematically vastly superior to the classic era, the vehicles had fundamentally lost their deeply intimidating, raw visual soul. The heavily integrated plastic bumpers and swooping rooflines completely lacked the terrifying, deeply visceral presence of the iconic 1970 Chevelle or the 1969 Mustang Boss. Automotive executives were aggressively pushing their design teams entirely toward the future, blindly ignoring the massive, heavily untapped psychological power of pure automotive nostalgia. But the entire global automotive industry was completely unaware that a massive, highly disruptive cultural earthquake was rapidly building deep within the corporate design studios of Detroit. A highly secretive project was quietly taking shape that would completely discard modern aerodynamic principles and aggressively reach backward in time, utilizing pure, unadulterated nostalgia to completely break the modern automotive market. What was the highly controversial, retrofuturistic concept vehicle that completely shocked the world at the 2004 North American International Auto Show? And how did its unprecedented public reception accidentally trigger the most violent, heavily unregulated, and mathematically absurd horsepower war in human history, directly leading to the creation of a massive supercharged corporate demon? The highly controversial, retrofuturistic concept vehicle that completely shocked the world at the 2004 North American International Auto Show was the fifth-generation Ford Mustang, universally known by its internal corporate designation as the S197 platform. To truly grasp the massive paradigm shift this specific vehicle caused across the entire automotive industry, we must rigorously analyze the prevailing design language of the early 2000s. The global market was entirely consumed by soft, highly aerodynamic curves, massive plastic body claddings, and heavily rounded jelly bean-inspired silhouettes. Automotive executives had heavily convinced themselves that forward-looking aerodynamic efficiency was the only viable path to long-term profitability. However, Ford completely discarded this modern philosophy. Chief designer Jay Mays and his specialized engineering team aggressively looked backward, taking absolute, unapologetic inspiration directly from the legendary 1967 and 1968 fastback models. They systematically integrated the iconic forward-leaning shark-bite grille, the deeply recessed round headlamps, the long hood proportions, and the traditional three-element vertical taillights. But beneath this heavy layer of pure aesthetic nostalgia, the engineering was entirely modern, featuring an incredibly stiff chassis specifically engineered to permanently eliminate the massive structural flex that heavily plagued the previous generation. When the American public saw the S197 Mustang, the emotional and financial reaction was instantaneous and fiercely powerful. It tapped directly into the collective memory of the baby boomer generation, while simultaneously capturing the fierce imagination of younger buyers who completely missed the original golden era. Imagine a highly calculated scenario set in our current year 2026. An automotive market analyst named Robert is heavily studying historical consumer trends to accurately predict the potential outcomes of a massive new vehicle launch. Robert observes through extensive data case studies that whenever a society feels heavily overwhelmed by rapid technological advancement and highly complex modern infrastructure shifts, consumers aggressively seek out tangible products that heavily remind them of a simpler, more mechanically raw era. This exact psychological phenomenon fueled the massive sales explosion of the 2005 Mustang, instantly generating hundreds of thousands of individual sales and completely blinding rival automakers who had heavily invested in futuristic designs. The sheer, unprecedented financial success of this retrofuturistic design forced General Motors and Chrysler into a massive state of absolute corporate panic. They realized they had to immediately resurrect their own dormant historical legends or completely lose the massive, highly lucrative performance demographic forever. Chrysler responded aggressively with the Dodge Challenger concept in 2006, followed rapidly by the full production model in 2008. The Challenger was fundamentally a rolling, massive anachronism. It was a nearly exact, heavily upscaled visual replica of the 1970 model, but it heavily utilized the robust Chrysler LX platform, an incredibly heavy, structurally dense architecture containing heavy engineering DNA directly sourced from Mercedes-Benz during the massive Daimler-Chrysler corporate merger. The global stage was perfectly set for a renewed, mathematically absurd horsepower war, but this modern conflict was fundamentally different from the 1960s. This time, engineers possessed highly advanced computer-aided design software, highly sophisticated metallurgical manufacturing processes, and wildly efficient forced induction systems heavily managed by massive multi-core processors. Initially, the top-tier naturally aspirated V8 engines in these heavy retro muscle cars produced a highly respectable 400 horsepower, but the intensely competitive corporate egos heavily escalated the mechanical conflict at an unprecedented rate. Ford introduced the massive, highly engineered supercharged 5.8-liter Trinity V8 in the 2013 Shelby GT500, officially breaking the 600 horsepower barrier and producing a heavily documented 662 horsepower. This incredible engineering feat utilized highly specialized plasma-transferred wire arc cylinder liners, completely eliminating the heavy traditional iron cylinder sleeves to significantly reduce engine weight, while heavily increasing internal thermal efficiency and block strength under extreme rotational stress. However, the absolute zenith of this violent, heavily unregulated modern conflict arrived when the rogue engineering division at Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, officially known as Street and Racing Technology, decided to fundamentally shatter every single established rule of mass production. They actively created the massive, supercharged corporate demon. It officially began in 2015 with the unprecedented, highly disruptive launch of the Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat. The engineering team took a heavily reinforced, cast-iron 6.2-liter Hemi V8 and bolted a massive 2.4-liter twin-screw supercharger directly to the aluminum intake manifold. The supercharger violently forced 30,000 liters of atmospheric air per minute directly into the engine cylinders, requiring highly specialized, massive fuel injectors that could mathematically drain the entire physical fuel tank in precisely 13 minutes under sustained wide-open throttle. The Hellcat produced a mathematically absurd 707 horsepower right off the dealership showroom floor, completely obliterating the performance metrics of highly advanced European supercars costing 5 times as much. But the SRT engineering teams were fundamentally unsatisfied with mere street dominance. They heavily analyzed historical case studies of the highly stripped, factory-built 1968 super stock drag cars and decided to build the ultimate, highly specialized street-legal drag strip weapon. In 2018, they officially unleashed the highly limited Dodge Challenger SRT Demon. This vehicle was not merely a heavily modified car. It was a pure, highly calculated feat of thermal and atmospheric manipulation. Engineers installed a significantly larger 2.7-liter supercharger, heavily increasing the absolute boost pressure to a staggering 14.5 pounds per square inch. To prevent the massive internal engine components from catastrophically melting under the extreme thermal load, they invented and patented a highly innovative mechanical system called the SRT Power Chiller. This highly complex system aggressively redirected the extremely cold refrigerant gas from the interior cabin air conditioning system directly into a dedicated, highly insulated cooling unit specifically designed to drastically lower the physical temperature of the liquid coolant flowing directly into the supercharger heat exchangers. This fundamentally cooled the massive intake air charge, creating incredibly dense oxygen molecules that allowed for massive, violently explosive combustion events. The Demon was explicitly engineered to aggressively produce an absolutely terrifying 840 horsepower and 770 pound-feet of torque when exclusively fueled by high-octane racing fuel. It was the absolute first mass-produced vehicle in human history specifically engineered to physically lift its front wheels completely off the pavement during a violent, perfectly prepped drag strip launch. It successfully utilized a highly specialized, factory-installed transmission brake system, fundamentally locking the output shaft of the transmission, while the driver heavily applied the throttle. This allowed the massive engine to violently build maximum supercharger boost pressure, while the heavy vehicle sat completely stationary at the starting line. When the driver released the steering wheel paddle, the massive, highly compressed kinetic energy was violently transferred through high-strength steel prop shafts directly to the highly specialized Nitto drag radial tires, aggressively propelling the massive vehicle from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a highly documented, physically painful 2.3 seconds. This specific vehicle represented the absolute, undeniable apex of the internal combustion engine, a roaring, terrifying monument to American industrial excess and raw engineering hubris. Yet, historical trends strictly dictate that massive, unchecked mechanical escalation always collides violently with shifting global macroeconomic realities and incredibly strict environmental legislative mandates. As we carefully analyze the highly advanced automotive landscape of 2026, the deep, visceral, highly mechanical roar of the supercharged V8 is rapidly fading into complete, government-mandated silence. Stricter global emissions standards and the massive, heavily subsidized shift toward advanced electric vehicle platforms have permanently forced the major Detroit automakers to systematically retire their massive internal combustion titans. The modern era of the American muscle car has officially come full circle, perfectly mirroring the catastrophic, sudden, and highly disruptive end of the original golden era in the early 1970s. The massive, sprawling assembly lines that once continuously forged heavy iron engine blocks are now aggressively producing highly efficient, incredibly heavy lithium-ion battery packs and massive, highly complex dual-motor electric drivetrains. But as these highly advanced, perfectly silent electric muscle cars begin to aggressively dominate the modern highway infrastructure, utilizing complex, highly processed artificial sound generators to poorly mimic the mechanical ghosts of the past, a highly secretive, fiercely dedicated underground network of rogue engineers and historical purists is actively refusing to let the raw internal combustion engine permanently die. What exactly are these highly funded, heavily guarded rebel factions currently building deep within their undisclosed, highly remote testing facilities to completely bypass modern government telemetry tracking? And how might their highly illegal, massive synthetic fuel chemical breakthroughs completely resurrect the terrifying, highly visceral violence of the massive V8 engine when the highly regulated world least expects it?